So this is Deborah, January-Bevers. I am with Houston Wilderness, and Houston Wilderness is involved with a whole host of different organizations involved in large-scale tree planting. That group is called the Tree Strategy Implementation Group, or TSIG, and this is the third forum we have held in conjunction with work that we're doing to help the city of Houston and their Resilient Houston Plan goal to plant 4.6 million trees by 2030. Today, I am very excited to introduce Mickey Merritt. Many of you know him already. He has been a big tree advocate with the Texas Forest Service for some time. And what we're going to do this morning is he's going to talk about invasive trees and tree stressors, and we've gotten a lot of emails of real interest in this topic for understandable reasons. And trees are a huge asset in our region and a big part of what makes our ecological areas so fabulous. Plus, we have so many different tree species that we can choose from. And so what I'm going to do is provide you all with a little bit of an idea of what you're going to see today. And on the video, then we're going to play the video, and then afterwards, Mickey can maybe give a little bit more background, if he'd like, on his involvement with the Texas Forest Service, and then we'll launch into Q&A for at least till the end of the hour. Then we try to wrap it up. So feel free to use the Q&A for that purpose. I've actually had some folks send me some questions already, so I will also have those. I'll be able to ask Mickey, so we'll kind of hit the ground running once the video is over. Let me go ahead real quick here and show you those slides. This is a little bit different than what we did in the two prior forums, but since this has some technical aspects to it, we thought it would be helpful if we just ran through a little bit of this first before you saw the video. So some of the problematic regional invasive tree species issues that Mickey will be talking about on the video are the Chinese tallow, which we all know about, and some of the issues that we have to deal with in sort of facing that invasive species all over our region, and how we go about bringing back those natives. And then the white mulberry versus red mulberry. This is a tricky one because one is invasive and non-native, and one is native and non-invasive. So one is particularly good for our region, the other one not so much. And we make some of that clarification in the video. Chinese privet and glossy privet, or ligustrum, as many of us know it as, that will be covered a little bit. A lot of people don't realize that's not a native shrub, sometimes even small tree. Mickey's going to talk about the invasive species database, which I think you will find very interesting. It's right here, so it'll be available on the video that we'll post on our website following this forum, but we can also certainly supply that to you, or Mickey can include it in the Q&A, so you can get that one written down and have that available to look at. He will refer to it in the during the video. And then we'll go into Mickey will go into some of those tree stressors. So improper pruning, improper placement of trees, compacted soils, which sometimes can be a problem, and how you go about remedying that. And then insect infestations. He'll be covering some of that as well, along with the importance of our native tree species diversity, of which, again, we have so many different species to choose from. We'll talk a little bit more about that during the Q&A. Avoiding a monoculture, or one particular tree in a large area that if there's a disease or something else could be a problem. Unnecessary human interactions. Mickey does a good job talking about that. And then we don't have a deep dive on the video, or Mickey doesn't, on drought and flooding, but we're going to bring that up during Q&A. So we'll be addressing some of the questions that have come up, wanting to know, how those are impacting various tree species. So with that, we'll go ahead and start the video and get moving on that. To let you know a couple things. One is it's about 12 minutes long, all extremely riveting, great information. So just so you have an idea of how long that'll be, and then we'll go right into that Q&A. Also, feel free to ask the questions as you see things, or something you'd like more clarified. Go ahead and just use the Q&A to do that, and then we'll know when we get back to this live portion that we want to cover some of those items. Mickey, anything else on your end before we start?
No, I think you covered it all. I'm good to go.
Okay, great. Well, Kim, if you'll go ahead and roll us on the video, that'd be awesome.
Today we're going to talk a little bit about tree stressors, including invasive species and other stressors that might affect trees at a particular site, such as plantings, site locations, things of that nature. And we're out here at Memorial Park, and what we have here is a little group of tallow trees, which are highly invasive. They're listed in most of the invasive plant atlases, and they can really take over a site and just transform a site. Matter of fact, we did a study years ago that showed that they were the #1 tree in the Houston region, the 7-county Houston region where we conducted the study. They comprised over 20% of the population. And they've really haven't only been around but maybe 30 or 40 years, a little bit longer, but they're aggressive and invasive, and they can alter a site. They're a big problem down in the coastal prairies where they can get a foothold down there because they're tolerant of a wide range of conditions, and they can really change a coastal prairie or wetland into just a single species forest and just alter the environment altogether. They're not the reason for the demise of the prairie chicken, but they're in there. They're one of the factors. A single mature tree can produce up to 100,000 seeds per year. They spread easily by water. They germinate on undisturbed land fairly easy. Chances are, in a landscape situation in your yard, if you're living in a subdivision, you're not going to get a lot of resprouting because people take care of their yards. But you never know when that bird is going to drop that seed off, a quarter of a mile away someplace else, or it's going to fall into the drainage ditch or float it downstream. So you just take that into consideration. One thing about Chinese tallow is that it has brilliant fall color, and a lot of people planted it for that, and a lot of people really like it because it does have brilliant fall color. They say that's one of the few species here in the Houston region that has that color. And I somewhat disagree with that because we have a multitude of other species that provide fall color. We have red maple, sweet gum. Some of the oaks provide fall color. So there are other trees out there that we can utilize that will provide the color if that's what you want. Some of our other invasives, white mulberry is one. It looks very similar to red mulberry, which is an excellent wildlife tree. Red mulberry is pretty shade tolerant. White mulberry, not as much so. It tends to grow more out in the open. To me, the bark looks different. White mulberry has more of a light brown, I guess, is more typical of it, where the bark on red mulberry is darker. There are some differences in the leaves. I have seen white mulberry sold at nurseries before, and a lot of people have planted them. So it's real important that when you're buying a mulberry tree for wildlife, that you do make sure it is the red mulberry and not the white mulberry, because the white mulberry can take over a site just like almost all of these non-native invasives. A couple of other invasives that we have on this site: Chinese privet and glossy privet. Chinese privet is more of a shrub about the size of Yupon, and it can grow like Yupon. It can grow rather thick, and it produces a lot of berries. Same with ligustrum, glossy privet. but that takes more of a tree form. That can get up to 30 to 40 feet tall, and it's evergreen. And so it can also shade out other species and take over a site. So I have a listing of common invasive trees in the Houston region, and along with that listing, I have where they're listed as far as Invasive Plant Atlas or Texas Department of Agriculture noxious weed site, and I also have a column for trees that are more suitable, native trees that we can use instead of using these invasives. A big stressor in not only the Houston region, but actually all over the country, probably all over the world, is improper pruning. Another stressor is planting the wrong tree in the wrong spot. You need to know the size of your lot, what you're looking for in the tree. I mean, are you wanting wildlife benefits? Are you wanting shade, energy conservation? Are you wanting flowering, fall color? Whatever you're looking for, think about that first. What is your end goal in planting the tree? What do you want? And then go out and start looking at the trees. Will the site support the tree? If you're planting a large mature tree, then you want to not plant it underneath power lines or close to power lines, and not plant it too close to a house either. Once the tree is there and established, of course you need to think about your watering and your maintenance issues. But also, if you have an established tree, then you have to think about if you're putting in an irrigation system or building a pool or redoing your sidewalk or driveway or something like that, how is that going to affect the root system of a tree? Because the tree's roots don't know property lines. They'll go wherever there's an ample supply of moisture and oxygen. You want to think about that. Think about your fertilizer usage. Are you using a weed and feed herbicide? That's not something that we encourage at all. That can do a lot of damage to trees if it's misapplied. And read the label of that as well. Other stressors are compacted soil, or urban soils are really compacted. So if you're planting a tree, you want to make sure that you dig your hole properly and plant the tree correctly, because our urban soils in most yards are pretty highly compacted. And planting depth is another issue. Also, when planting, you want to think about diversity. While it might look good to see a live oak on every front yard, you know, and you have these big arching canopies, while that might be aesthetically pleasing, that's not really the best thing. It creates a monoculture, and something like oak wilt can come in and just devastate the urban forest. So we really like to preach diversity and make sure you have a good mix of genuses, a good mix of species, and a good mix of different families. Out here in Memorial Park, just looking around, there's about 3 or 4 different oak trees right here, species of oak trees. We have a couple of different ash trees, pine trees, a couple of different elm species, bromeliad. So it's got a pretty good diversity here in the park. So we want to keep that diversity, and that way if we do get a disease or an insect in here, we won't lose all of our trees. Plus, it's really better for wildlife. The more diverse your forest can be, the better off. We get a lot of questions about why is my tree dying? And sometimes there's nothing wrong with your tree. Homeowners will think that their tree is dead, and really there's nothing wrong with it. It's just that species has held on to its leaves longer, even though the leaves have gone ahead and basically died or fallen off for the winter. But the tree still held them on. And then there's things like this post oak behind me with the resurrection fern. During the summer when it's hot and dry, the resurrection fern will just shrivel up and you'll hardly notice it. But after a rain or a high humid day, then the resurrection fern will kind of leaf out and it will be all over the tree, and people are concerned that there's something wrong with their tree. We also have some invasive insects that we need to worry about. One of the insects we're concerned about is emerald ash borer. It's up in the Dallas region, or actually Fort Worth. It's not a matter of if we'll get it in Houston, it's a matter of when. It could be 2 years from now, it could be 10, 15 years from now. We just don't know. We're actively monitoring and trapping for it, but it will eventually get here. And all of our native and non-native ash trees are susceptible to it as well. So what we want to do is not create paranoia and have people cut down every ash tree in their yards, or not even replant ash trees, but to educate yourself about what happens with emerald ash borer. And you can save your ash trees if you take the proper precautions. If you treat the trees when the ash borer starts coming into the region, good maintenance techniques and proper treating, proper watering, we can save a lot of our ash trees. Houston has come a long way, and the region has come a long way in regards to trees and encouraging tree planting and tree health and tree maintenance. I remember back in the early 80s, trees were kind of an afterthought. And now there are so many groups doing so much good work that we're really starting to see that benefit. Because trees do provide a lot for the region. If you look at energy conservation, it's hundreds of millions of dollars in energy conservation, hundreds of $millions in pollution mitigation, in stormwater runoff, in carbon storage. We're looking now at healthy trees, healthy lives, and how trees affect health. They help to reduce stress. They help when children have views of nature. They help in school. Children tend to have better grades and behave a little bit better. Hospitals, they're starting to see the effects of, or learn the effects of trees and nature on patients. We've come a long way, and we really, when I drive down a freeway now, it's such a stark difference between what was there in the 80s and even the early 90s and what we have now.
Thank you, Mickey. That was fabulous.
Thank you.
Well, why don't I let you go ahead and introduce yourself a little bit more. I know I did that in the beginning. Talk a little bit perhaps about some things that are particularly on the horizon for the Texas Forest Service, and then we'll jump into these questions, of which I've got a few here, and I see some more coming in.
Okay. Well, my name is Mickey Merritt, and I'm with the Texas A&M Forest Service. I'm the Houston Regional Community Forester, and we work with communities and organizations throughout the area. I guess the Houston region expands from the Louisiana border all the way down to Victoria, mainly among the coastal counties. And so we work a lot with communities on tree inventories, on tree planting projects, on studies on the ecological and ecosystem services of trees within the region or within a community.
That's great. Well, one of the things that has come in that I wanted to ask you about has to do with drought and flooding. Maybe you want to cover those separately or more together, but those are certainly impacts that we're seeing more and more of, right? And so large rain events, I suspect that you all have had some experience related to how trees handled Harvey, for instance, Hurricane Harvey and other recent rain events. So perhaps we should cover that first, and then we'll circle back and talk a little bit about drought, which we haven't seen a lot of lately, but of course, not that many years ago, we know the impact that it had on Memorial Park, where you were in the video.
Right. Yeah. We've been, this summer, we did a study of, we have what's called FIA plots, or Forest Inventory Analysis plots. And those are permanent plots that we go out and we remeasure about every 5 years. Look at the vegetation, the tree health, the tree growth, tree damage, those types of things. And so we pulled out quite a few plots that were in flood areas from Hurricane Harvey. And we went out and assessed those trees. And we're still We've gathered the data, but we're still working through it, so I don't have any results on that. But I will say that we are seeing some decline, and what you have to remember with flooding, some species might die really quickly, but others it takes a long time. So just like in drought, we have seen effects of drought for years and years and years, and the same with flooding. It might 5, 6, 7, 8, maybe even 10 years is how long it takes a tree to really recover or to die from both drought and or flooding.
Okay, wow. And there may be some follow-up specific questions in that regard that folks want to ask. Are the Yupon and cherry laurel considered invasive?
It's a good question. It's a loaded question too. It can get pretty political. A lot of people say that a native tree can't be invasive, and a lot of folks think that it is invasive. I tend to lean on it's an aggressive tree. It's a native aggressive, because it is very good for wildlife. I have both Yupon and cherry laurel in my yard, and the birds just love them. But you have to keep it under control, because they can get out of control if left unmaintained.
Got it. Okay. I have another one. I see a lot of topping of crepe myrtles. Is that a good practice? We've heard it sort of both ways.
Yeah, no, it's not a good practice. We call it crepe murder. And yeah, it can lead to some pretty severe problems of crepe myrtles. So we never encourage topping of crepe myrtles.
Got it.
Crepe myrtles flower on new growth, and that's why a lot of times people top it. And actually, a lot of people top them because that's just what they've always done, and that's what they've always seen. And so they're using that philosophy. But really and truly, I have crepe myrtles in my yard that I've never once touched, and they flower just well.
So that would just be really an education thing, is kind of getting that information out into the community that, you know, if you're going to keep the non-native crepe myrtle, don't prune it like that. Don't prune it back. Let it do its thing naturally, which will save the tree, really.
It's an education process.
Yeah. Got it. How about, any tree really, but certainly sort of those larger trees that people have in their yards, whether it's, residential or corporate, who may have many, or for that matter, public places. What is generally the idea of who should be best to be hired to prune trees?
Yeah, you should usually use a certified arborist. Certified arborists are certified by the International Society of Arboriculture. And they do have to have training. They have to go through a pretty rigorous test, and they have to have a certain number of years of experience and education in order to become what's called an ISA certified arborist.
Are they hard to find?
No, not really. You can find them. There's a website called Trees Are Good.
Trees Are Good.
Yeah, and actually there's a lot of good information on that website. But when you log on to that website, there's a tab for find a certified arborist or verify an arborist, something like that.
Wow. So it's treesaregood like .com or .org?
Yeah, I think it's .com or .org.
Okay.
I always just do Trees Are Good.
Okay, good. All right. I think that'd be helpful to a lot of people. And then if people want to understand more about pruning, maybe they don't necessarily want to hire somebody, or their trees are small enough for their shrubs that they would like to do it themselves. Is there a place where they can find out more information on proper pruning?
The same website, Trees Are Good.
Oh, okay, great. Okay, that's awesome. And how do people know if they've planted their tree too deep? I saw an article not that long ago talking about that people tend to think that the deeper they plant it, the better for the roots, but in actuality, that's not always the case. So what's your thoughts on that?
Actually, trees should be planted, if you're using containerized trees, the top of the root ball should be about an inch or two higher than the existing soil grade. Not your grass length, but the soil. And there's also something called a root collar that should be exposed, and it should be about an inch or two above the soil grade. So if you're taking a tree from a pot, from a container, make sure that you find the root collar. And again, you can Google that and find out exactly what the root collar is and where it's located, and then dig your hole accordingly. Usually it's about 1.5 to 2 times the width of the root ball, and then a little bit shallower than the root ball. So you want it up just a little bit so it stays a little bit drier and it's not like enclosed in a clay pot, I guess, when we're planting in the Houston soils.
Okay, and that sounds like probably that helps also for purposes of flooding or drought.
Yeah.
It probably helps the tree as well that it was planted like that.
And also, I do want to say this on planting. We encourage mulching, a mulch layer of about 2 inches or so, 2 to 3 inches, no more than 3 inches, and not these volcano mulches or mulch mounds that you see. That's done a lot, and nobody admits to doing it, but somebody does it because you always see it. So you want that mulch spread out over the root ball and about 2 inches or so away from the trunk of the tree, and at a depth no more than 2 to 3 inches.
Okay, great. And actually, this gives me an opportunity to plug a little bit about the tree strategy implementation group that I mentioned before we ran the video that is working. It's all the large scale tree planters, native tree planters in the region have come together to create this TSIG, as we call it, or Tree Strategy Implementation Group. And we are working, Mickey serves on the TSIG, we are working on a manual that would provide kind of the soup to nuts of everything you'd want to know about doing tree planting in our region, particularly large scale tree planting, but really whatever size. And we'll be including a section on that as well. And we'll let the world know once we have that manual ready. I know at the last forum that we held where we did a case example with the Houston Parks Board on Greens Bio, we had a lot of questions on when that manual would be ready. We're hoping to have it ready by the summer and posted on all our respective websites. Phil, and we'll also be sending information out by email to all the same distribution lists about that, which will be helpful as well, I think, to have kind of in one place all the different pieces of what people want to know in order to be able to work with our native trees and all the different species that are out there, which is so exciting. I have a question here. Don't Chinese tallow provide benefits like other trees in pollution and stormwater mitigation and in carbon storage and sequestration? So kind of wanting to know about whether they can hold on to that Chinese tallow.
Yeah, I mean, the answer is yes, they do provide benefits, but it's a yes, but answer. There are other species that are native to our region that are much better to plant that provide better benefits, not only for the carbon storage and sequestration and pollution mitigation, things like that, but for wildlife as well. And when we're talking about tallow trees taking over a prairie system, well, prairies provide benefits too. They are a tremendous benefit in stormwater mitigation and stormwater water quality and things like that. And they also help to sequester and store carbon. So yeah, the Chinese tallow do, but we have other species that do a much better job and more efficient job.
Yeah, we really do. And so this will provide me an opportunity to mention that you can find on the HoustonWilderness.org website under Port of Houston Trees program. It's one of our programs. You can, there's a drop-down menu that you can find that. And it's got a nice chart that lists almost all of our native trees and the different levels of ecosystem services in water absorption, greenhouse gas absorption, carbon sequestration. I believe canopy size is also on there to give you an idea if you're looking at some energy savings, related to canopy size or perhaps urban heat island reduction. So feel free to look there at that website. And then in a related question I've had here is, where can we find native tree species lists? And one that I certainly know about that we talked about at the October TSIG forum when Kelly Ondrasik with Houston Parks and Rec talked about at length about the city of Houston's tree and shrub ordinance has a tree list, both a large tree list and a small tree list of native tree species. They've recently revamped that to ensure that they have only natives on that list. And there's that video is available on our website as well, as is the one that we did last month with the Parks Board. But if you go to the City of Houston or search for City of Houston tree list, that will come up, and it provides a nice list of the various tree species in our region, that are available to choose from. But Mickey, you may have some more thoughts on that.
Yeah, actually, the Native Plant Society of Houston has a very good list. And of course, it covers a lot more than trees, but I refer to that list at times as well.
Okay, great.
We have our own list. We have on our website, Texas A&M Forest Service, our tree guide or tree planting guide. There's a listing of trees, and it's kind of interactive where you can search two ways. You can go in and enter your county and do a quick search, and it will give you the top 4 trees to plant in that county. Or you can customize it, and then you can pick several different options, like you want a tree for wildlife, you want a tree with fall color. It even asks you about your yard. How much space do you have in your yard, or what is the size of your lot? Do you want a deciduous tree? And so you can go in and do that, and it will spit out quite a few trees.
Okay, good. Well, and if anybody wants more specific information on that, we can feel free to reach out to me, Deborah January-Bevers, or to Mickey, and we can get that information to you with more detail. And all that kind of information will also be in the TSIG manual once we kind of bring that all together. Something else that has been asked here is there a look at our tree species in relation to climate change and global warming? Are we, or is the region thinking that certain trees should be discouraged, that even though they're native, because of climate change, or what's sort of the thinking out there right now?
Well, I have heard some discussion about that. My feeling is right now it's a little bit too early to start bringing in a lot of trees from hotter, drier climates. I mean, as we saw in this recent freeze, a lot of our introduced species did not do very well. And when I ride around, I see a lot of the native trees, native species seem to have handled the freeze really well. But at least in my yard, all of my native species did well in almost every single one of the introduced species. I don't have a lot, but almost every single one of the introduced species did not handle the freeze very well. So I think in looking at climate change, we just need to be careful. We need to start thinking about some species from hotter, drier regions, but know their limitations.
Well, and I know also that, and this is going to come up with our before we publish the manual, we'll be talking a little bit, maybe not quite those specifics, but similar, and that is there, because of the diversity that's being planted now out there, because we're looking at 4.6 million trees by 2030 for that Resilient Houston goal, and a lot of the other large-scale tree planting initiatives now really taking off, which will all be part of that, obviously. The idea that we need the diversity of the tree species also lends itself to observations on what's happening. How is the loblolly pine doing with warmer temperatures? How are the ash trees doing? And then that idea of planting that diversity in all the various places where we do that, whether it's along freeways. Most of us have all driven the freeways, seen the diversity of the tree species TxDOT is planting, and of course, large parks, corporate campuses, residential areas, all those places we'll all be able to kind of watch as our temperatures change And then there's also some specific areas where I think that kind of observation is taking place to see how the different species are doing. In other words, if we plant the species, then we can watch how they're handling the different weather changes.
Yeah.
Are there any species, it says here, that you just simply can't find out there? If you, for instance, let's say they're on all the lists, but you can't find it.
Yeah, there's a ton of them. I mean, the nurseries sell what the buyers want. And so I think it's our job to educate the public on good tree species for the region and create that demand that the growers and the nurseries then will start growing them and selling them. So right now, I mean, look how many people buy live oaks. Look how many live oaks we plant.
Yeah.
In some neighborhoods, that's almost all you see. And live oak is a very good tree.
Yeah.
But you know, we need to preach diversity, and we can substitute live oak, or we can substitute a lot of other species in place of live oak. So it's just going out, finding those lists of native trees that are suitable for the Houston region, learning about those trees, and then requesting those trees and getting the nurseries and the growers to see the demand of it.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I know the Tree Strategy Implementation Group has been talking about how we might go about doing that as a sort of a collaborative effort and on the TSIG also sits some of the major landscape architects in the region, who oftentimes are the ones doing those orders as well. And so encouraging that the tree nurseries, the tree farms, and the retail establishments begin to grow and then carry all those different species. And then, of course, just encouraging that those different species are indeed planted. For those that might want to go to the Houston Wilderness website and see that tree list that's under Port of Houston trees, it's very interesting to see how many species that you don't see a lot, and may be difficult to get now, although we're trying to change that, are not out there and yet are really amazing trees. That some of them flower, large, trees that have a ability to flower, to change color, as Mickey mentions in the video. There's many, like the Laurel oak, for instance. It really changes beautiful color, and yet I don't really see the Laurel oak the same way that we see the live oak, which is another one that's high in ecosystem services. So, yeah, I think the more that that all the different agencies and entities out there involved in tree planting can consider that diversity and really encourage it. It's, as you say, Mickey, if farmers know that there's going to be a demand for it, then they'll start growing them.